Latvia has just paralyzed one of Russia's most important military lifelines, and did it without launching a missile, mobilizing troops, or even entering a confrontation. Instead, they targeted something far more vulnerable: Russia's railway arteries. For decades, Putin relied on the Baltic region as a natural extension of its military infrastructure: Soviet-era rails, power lines, and supply routes that allowed Russia to move tanks, fuel, and artillery to the European frontier in a matter of hours. These were the tools of pressure the Kremlin believed could never be removed. But now, Latvia has turned that assumption into a trap. President Rinkevics and Prime Minister Salina introduced a decisive plan: not to pause railway connections with Russia, but to physically dismantle them, tearing up the rails and excavating the very ground they rest on. This is not infrastructure maintenance, it is a long-term military doctrine disguised as domestic policy. Why rails? Because Russia moves war the same way it moved troops in the 20th century: heavy armor on wide-gauge tracks. Latvia knows that Russian tanks and artillery depend on rail transport like oxygen. Without the tracks, Russia's logistics suffocate. But this isn't just a Latvian move. It's part of something larger, something stretching across the entire Baltic frontier. And the next piece of this puzzle makes the situation even more dangerous, because Latvia is not acting alone. And what comes next will corner Russia in ways it has not faced in decades. As Latvia tears up its railway lines, Estonia pushes the pressure even further. The Narva crossing, once the main route into St. Petersburg, has already been fortified, restricted, and partially shut down. Estonia's next step is on the table: complete severing of its Russian rail connection at Kaidula. When combined with Latvia's dismantling of the Zilipē line and northern crossings, something historic forms along the border: a continuous, impenetrable wall from Finland down through Estonia, Latvia, and deep into Lithuania. Russia's entire Western military and logistical network suddenly hits a dead end. And here's the part Moscow fears most: all Baltic states are rapidly transitioning from Russia's broad 1,520mm Soviet rail gauge to Europe's 1,435mm standard. Once this conversion is complete, Russian trains will not physically fit into these countries. They simply won't be able to enter. This isn't a blockade. It's an engineering-based geopolitical amputation. And when we shift our eyes to Lithuania, the consequences reach an even more sensitive target: Kaliningrad, Russia's isolated military fortress in Europe. Lithuania's control over the Kaliningrad transit corridor means it holds the last remaining artery supplying over 1 million civilians and thousands of Russian troops. Any adjustments, restrictions, or shutdowns instantly become a noose tightening around the region. And Latvia's dismantling of its rail lines pushes this noose even tighter. But the real shock comes next, because the Baltics are also striking at another Russian dependency: the flow of electricity itself. If dismantling railways cripples Russia's physical logistics, the next blow threatens something deeper: the Kremlin's energy leverage. For decades, the Baltic states were tied to Russia through the Soviet-era Brel electricity grid, meaning Moscow had the technical ability to plunge cities like Riga, Tallinn, and Vilnius into darkness with a single command. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was political coercion. But that era has ended. Lithuania dismantled its remaining Russian power lines. Estonia strengthened its connection with Finland through the massive Estlink 2 upgrade. And Poland built entirely new infrastructure to ensure the Baltics could fully synchronize with Europe. Then, in February 2025, something historic happened. The Baltic states disconnected from the Russian grid and switched to the European network, permanently. Lights stayed on. Hospitals stayed powered. Russia lost the ability to flip the switch. Meanwhile, Lithuania halted the rail transit of fuel to Kaliningrad, cutting supplies critical for heating, electricity generation, civilian transport, and military readiness. Suddenly, Russia's fortress city is facing not just logistical isolation, but the risk of energy shortages as well. This combination, severed rails, severed energy lines, and unified NATO coordination, is transforming Russia's western border into the most strategically vulnerable it has been since the fall of the USSR. And the consequences for Kaliningrad, for Russia's European strategy, and for Putin himself, are only beginning to unfold. What are your thoughts on this situation? Share your opinions in the comment section. I'd love to hear your perspective.